The enormous twin rotors of a stolen Chinook helicopter thunder over the South China Sea on April 29, 1975. Behind, black smoke billows from Saigon as communist artillery pounds the collapsing city. At the controls, South Vietnamese Air Force Major Ba Van Nguyen white-knuckles the stick, a marked man. In the cabin, his wife and 3 young children cling to each other as communists hunt down military families. Suddenly, a warning light flashes red. Fuel critically low. As Nguyen frantically wonders what to do, he picks up voices speaking English through his headset. He understands very little, but it can only mean one thing. There's an American warship nearby. He follows the signal until he finds it, destroyer USS Kirk. Nguyen musters his limited English to send a desperate message, quote, "I must land or crash into the sea. Please help us." But a ship's crew waves him off. Kirk's deck is far too small for the massive Chinook. Nguyen looks at his near-empty fuel gauge, then back at his family. He might not be able to land on Kirk, but he's got a plan so crazy, it just might work. A desperate solution. As April 1975 wore on, Ba Van Nguyen knew the situation was looking increasingly grim for South Vietnam. The United States had officially withdrawn its forces from combat over 2 years previously, with just a few military advisors and diplomatic personnel remaining in the country, while Nguyen and his fellow South Vietnamese were left to fight the war themselves. However, initial American optimism about the South's ability to defend itself from the North soon dissipated, as the Communists proved unstoppable in their march on Saigon, quickly closing the net on the city. On April 21st, South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thieu resigned on national television. Panic gripped the people of Saigon as they were haunted by memories of the 1968 Hue massacre. When North Vietnamese forces had briefly occupied that city, they systematically executed South Vietnamese military personnel, government officials, and civilians. There was nothing to suggest they wouldn't do the same thing in Saigon. For 35-year-old Ba Van Nguyen, this was a wake-up call. As a major in the South Vietnamese Air Force, he believed the Communists would be unlikely to spare his life, nor those of his family. His wife, Ngo Tran, his sons, Miki and Mika, and his 10-month-old daughter, Mina. None of them spoke much English, and they didn't have the necessary connections to secure a place on the evacuation flights alongside the Americans and other foreigners left in Saigon. Their chances of escape were slim. As the North Vietnamese army surrounded Saigon with 100,000 troops by April 27th, Major Nguyen watched the chain of command collapse. No new orders came. No evacuation plans materialized for most South Vietnamese military families. On April 29th, the airport came under bombardment, eliminating any possibility of flying out using its runway. Communist forces were now just 26 miles from the capital. Nguyen knew he would need to take matters into his own hands, and he only had hours to do so. A daring plan. With Saigon teetering on the brink of collapse, Major Nguyen began formulating a desperate plan to get him and his family to safety, drawing on his extensive military preparation. Years earlier, he'd received specialized flight training in Alabama and Texas, where American instructors had taught him to master the controls of the CH-47 Chinook, a massive twin-rotor helicopter designed for heavy transport operations. Nguyen knew that the South Vietnamese Air Force was still in possession of several Chinooks. As the CH-47 wouldn't require the use of Saigon's badly damaged runway to take off, he believed it might represent his family's best chance of survival. Nevertheless, it would not be easy. The Chinook was one of the largest helicopters in the South Vietnamese Air Force's arsenal. Its enormous size, 98 feet long, with rotors that spanned 60 feet in diameter, made it an unlikely escape vehicle, not to mention the fact that he had no authorization to use it. For a career military officer, this was undoubtedly no small decision. Taking a multi-million-dollar aircraft without permission would normally be considered theft of government property, potentially resulting in court-martial. But these weren't normal times. Nguyen moved his family to his mother-in-law's house in a residential neighborhood of Saigon, where he instructed his wife, Ngo, to prepare for immediate departure. He told her, quote, "If you hear a Chinook coming, get ready." That night, the sounds of artillery and gunfire drew closer than ever around Saigon. Frightened, Nguyen's 6-year-old son Miki slept under the bed. Nevertheless, the boy remained confident. He would later recall, quote, "I knew my dad was coming." Escape. The next morning, the unmistakable thump of rotor blades echoed across the neighborhood. Confused locals looked on as Ba Van Nguyen guided a commandeered Chinook down toward his family's position. As the Chinook touched down in the small clearing, Mickey Nguyen and his family raced toward the helicopter. The 6-year-old clutched clothes and baby milk for his infant sister as they sprinted across the open ground. Reaching the helicopter door, Mickey's mother, No, turned back toward her extended family and called out desperately for them to follow. But her relatives declined, telling her, quote, "That's your husband. You go with him." With his wife, 3 children, and several friends now aboard, Nguyen lifted the Chinook skyward. His initial plan was to make a second stop to gather supplies and meet with other squadron members before heading to a remote island. But as they flew over the South China Sea, Nguyen detected something unexpected: English-language communications coming through his radio. Adjusting his headphones, he strained to make out the words. American naval vessels must be nearby. Instead of continuing toward an isolated island, with limited prospects for long-term survival, Nguyen made a split-second decision to follow the radio signals. Soon, they spotted a ship on the horizon, USS Kirk, a destroyer escort vessel deployed to protect the American evacuation. As Nguyen approached, a red warning light flashed on his instrument panel. The Chinook was critically low on fuel. Nguyen radioed the destroyer on an emergency frequency. Despite his limited English, he managed to convey their desperate situation, saying, quote, "I must land or crash into the sea. Please help us." Kirk's crew faced an impossible dilemma. Captain Paul Jacobs could see this was a South Vietnamese helicopter, likely carrying refugees. But the Chinook was simply too large for the destroyer's small landing deck. If Nguyen attempted to land, the massive rotors could tear into the ship's superstructure, potentially causing severe casualties among both passengers and crew. From the deck below, sailors frantically waved him off, using hand signals to communicate that landing was impossible. But Nguyen had one final daring plan. Through crude sign language, he indicated his intentions. He would hover the 12-ton Chinook directly over Kirk's fantail, and the crew would need to catch his passengers as they jumped from the helicopter's open door. For 20 excruciating minutes, Nguyen performed one of the most remarkable feats of helicopter piloting ever witnessed. Holding the massive aircraft steady 15 feet above the deck of a bobbing ship required extraordinary skill and concentration. Too high, and his family might be injured in the fall. Too low, and the whirling blades would tear into the ship. Mickey jumped first, followed by his little brother. Then came the most heart-stopping moment. No clutched her 10-month-old baby daughter, Mina. No, terrified of water and unable to swim, followed immediately after. Every passenger was safely caught. No one was injured. Alone in the cockpit of the massive helicopter, with fuel nearly exhausted, Nguyen now had to find a way to save himself. He guided the Chinook away from the American vessel to a safe distance. While keeping the helicopter hovering steadily above the water, Nguyen somehow managed to remove his flight suit, shoulder holster, and gun until he was down to just a white floral shirt and red boxer shorts his wife had made for him. In a precisely calculated maneuver, he rolled the Chinook to the right while simultaneously jumping from the left door. The Chinook crashed into the water with a sound like a freight train collision. Jagged metal shrapnel from the helicopter blades whistled through the air. The massive aircraft flipped upside down, its wheels pointing up toward the sky. From Kirk's deck, the American sailors scanned the churning water for any sign of Nguyen. As a cloud of red liquid spread across the water's surface, they feared the worst, believing he must have been caught in the wreckage or crushed by the impact. Yet suddenly, to their surprise, a small head bobbed to the surface. Nguyen was alive. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the American sailors, congratulating Nguyen on his incredible feat. A rescue boat was immediately dispatched, and within minutes, the South Vietnamese major was pulled from the water and brought aboard the ship, where he was reunited with his family. Though Nguyen stood on the deck in nothing but his red boxer shorts and white shirt, he remarkably showed no sign of the ordeal he had just survived. As he spoke calmly with Captain Jacobs, His demeanor remained composed and unruffled. Sadly, the gold bars he had placed in his pockets, the family's only remaining wealth, were gone, lost to the depths of the South China Sea. Yet he had successfully saved his wife and children. The American Dream. After going from USS Kirk to Guam, Wake Island, and Camp Pendleton, the Nguyen family finally arrived in Bellevue, Washington, on July 22, 1975. Just 5 days after arriving in the United States, Nguyen secured his first job at Suntran Electronics, earning $2.75 an hour. He attended technical school by day and worked as a custodian by night. Within 6 months, he had taken his family off government assistance. He would tell his children, quote, "Your mother and I came to the United States with nothing but my drawers. Look at where we are today. We are not wealthy, but we are not poor." For decades, Nguyen's remarkable story remained largely unknown. He once wrote about the escape for a Vietnamese newspaper, but in the third person, never revealing he was the pilot. In 2009, the story resurfaced when Captain Jacobs began searching for the mysterious Chinook pilot, leading to an emotional reunion with Kirk's crew the following year. By then, Nguyen was suffering from Alzheimer's and used a wheelchair. Yet, when a Navy officer pinned an air medal for bravery on his jacket, Nguyen, who hadn't stood in years, struggled to his feet and offered a final, dignified salute. On June 17, 2013, Ba Van Nguyen passed away at the age of 73. He left behind a legacy of extraordinary courage and the family he risked everything to save.